Welcome, dear listener. Settle in now and allow yourself to breathe a little slower. Let the world beyond your room grow softer, quieter. Feel the gentle weight of your body resting where you are, and let every sound, every word flow like a stream carrying you toward calm. Tonight, I will tell you a story, not a story of drama or loud emotions, but of soft encounters, of tender stillness, of a love that was never rushed. A love that bloomed in silence. This is the story of Camille, and of the mirror that did not reflect her face. But something even gentler, even more comforting. It is a story of quiet longing, of unspoken closeness, and of finding warmth in the glow of another soul. As you listen, let the words come to you like moonlight on water, slow, delicate, shimmering, and allow your own heart to settle into peace in a quiet part of the city where the cobblestone streets curved softly beneath lamps that flickered like sleepy stars. There was a little antique shop. Its windows always glowed faintly with golden light, as if the room inside breathed differently from the world outside. Camille often passed it on her way home. She worked in a library, and her evenings were filled with the hush of turning pages and the scent of paper that had been touched by many hands. She liked silence, but sometimes silence felt too wide, like a room too large for just one person. And so, on her walks home, she often slowed near that antique shop, peering in at the shelves stacked with forgotten things. One evening, the sky was brushed with the faintest violet, the air cool enough to tug at her shawl. She paused outside the shop again, and this time, she stepped inside. The air was different there, warmer, softer, carrying a faint trace of wood polish and dried roses. The shelves leaned close with trinkets, clocks that had long stopped ticking, porcelain cups with faded rims, books whose spines were curled with age. But it was in the corner near a window that Camille noticed something unusual: a mirror. Tall, its frame worn with time, carved with vines that seemed almost alive in the shadows. Yet when she stepped toward it, her breath caught, for the glass did not show her. Not her shawl, not her face, not her figure at all. Instead, the surface shivered like water, and slowly, gently, an image emerged. A man's eyes, soft, steady, and filled with something she could not name. They looked at her as though they had been waiting, as though she was not a stranger, but someone familiar, someone known. Camille lifted her hand, hesitating. The eyes did not blink. They simply gazed, calm and tender, as if they carried an unspoken promise. The shop around her seemed to grow still, even the faint hum of the outside street faded. And there she stood, a woman gazing into a mirror that did not return her reflection, but instead offered her a pair of eyes, warm and endlessly patient. She whispered without thinking, "Who are you?" But the glass only glowed faintly, and the eyes only softened, as though the question itself was enough, as though words were not needed. And in that quiet moment, Camille realized she had never been looked at quite like this before. In the days that followed, Camille could not forget the mirror. It was not just the strangeness of it, a glass that refused to give her back her own reflection. It was the feeling, the warmth in those eyes, the calmness that lingered in her chest long after she left the shop. Each night, after finishing her work at the library, she found herself drifting once again toward the cobblestone street. She would tell herself she was only walking home the usual way, but her steps always slowed before the shop's window, always led her inside to that quiet corner where the mirror waited. The shopkeeper, an older woman with silver hair tied in a bun, never asked why Camille came. She only smiled knowingly, as if she understood that the shop itself drew people back for reasons they could not explain. And so each evening, Camille stood before the mirror. the stranger's gaze was always there, steady as moonlight, patient. As the turning of the seasons, he never spoke, never moved beyond the faint shifting of light across his features. But the way he looked at her, it was enough to make her feel less alone. She began to notice small details, the curve of his mouth relaxed and gentle, the way his dark hair fell against his forehead, as though stirred by an unseen wind, the faint glow around him, like the shimmer of candlelight in a room she could not enter. Sometimes, when she returned late, the mirror seemed to glow brighter, as though it had been waiting, and Camille would lean closer, her fingertips hovering just above the glass. She never touched it, not yet, but she felt the closeness, as though if she stayed long enough, the air itself might fold in, and he would be standing before her. There was never any fear in her heart, only a quiet curiosity. Each night became like a ritual. The hush of the library, the violet sky above the streets, the glow of the little shop, and the tender eyes waiting in the glass. And little by little, Camille found herself speaking to him. Not loudly, not with expectation, just a whisper, soft enough to blend with the air. "This morning, the rain fell softly against my window," she murmured one evening. "It sounded like a lullaby." Another night, she said, "I passed the flower market on my way here. The roses smelled like summer, even though it is still spring." And though no voice replied, she thought she saw it the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth, as if he was listening, as if every word she offered found a place in him. The shop itself seemed to lean into their silence. The clocks never chimed, the shelves never creaked. Only the mirror glowed, and the stranger's eyes met hers with unwavering gentleness. And in those quiet evenings, Camille began to realize something. The loneliness that once stretched wide inside her was softening, not gone, not forgotten, but touched by a warmth that grew each night, like a lantern carried into a darkened room. Later, as she stepped back onto the cobblestone street, she noticed how even the air felt different. The city lights shimmered softer, the night sky seemed closer, as though the world itself had grown gentler. And always she knew she would return, for the mirror no longer felt like an object in a shop. It felt like a doorway, to a presence, to a gaze, to a quiet love that waited just for her. One evening, the sky was brushed with clouds, the color of faded pearl, and the streets gleamed with a light rain that had passed only moments before. Camille arrived at the shop later than usual. She slipped inside quietly, shaking droplets from her shawl, and felt the warmth of the familiar room surround her. The mirror was waiting, just as it always was. Its frame caught the lamplight, vines carved in wood seeming to sway in shadow, alive in their stillness and in the glass. His eyes, steady, gentle, the same calm that had begun to feel like home to her. She stepped closer, whispering softly as she had before. "I almost didn't come tonight. The rain tried to hold me back." The stranger's gaze seemed to deepen, as though her words had stirred something behind the silence. Camille tilted her head, smiling faintly. "But I think you would have waited anyway, wouldn't you?" It was then that something changed. A soft mist began to bloom across the surface of the glass, like breath upon a window pane. At first, Camille thought it was the dampness from her shawl, but no, the fog grew within the mirror itself, curling gently until the image blurred. She leaned closer, her hand hovering just above the frame. "Are you still there?" she whispered. And then, through the soft fog, she heard it, a voice. Low, quiet, like dusk itself had spoken. "I remember." The sound of rain on wooden rooftops, Camille's breath stilled. The words were simple, but they reached into her heart with the weight of something impossibly familiar. She had never spoken of her childhood, of the little village where she once lived, where the rain always sang against the cottages at night. And yet, this voice had spoken the memory as though it were hers. She whispered back, hardly daring to believe, I remember that too. The fog shifted, clearing just enough for his face to emerge more clearly than ever before. Not only his eyes now, but the softness of his mouth, the shadow of his cheek, the faint glow that seemed to carry warmth across time itself. Camille felt her chest loosen, as though something long locked away had been gently unfastened. She had always lived quietly, always kept her thoughts folded close, yet now, here was someone who seemed to know the shape of them before she spoke. Each night after, the fog would return. Not always, not fully, but just enough for his voice to reach her in whispers. Your library smells like cedar, he said one evening, though she had never mentioned it aloud. You hum softly when you walk alone, he told her another night. And she realized with wonder that it was true, and Camille, in turn, began to share more. The lullabies her mother once sang, the way she loved the sound of pages turning in a quiet room, the little joy of finding sunlight lingering on her desk at the end of the day. He never interrupted, he never hurried, he only listened, his gaze carrying a tenderness so steady, so certain that she felt as though each word she offered was being gathered carefully, as if each belonged to him as much as it belonged to her. The shop itself seemed to hush even more deeply during these exchanges. The shelves leaned closer, the air grew warm, and Camille realized she was no longer speaking into silence. She was speaking into a presence, into someone who reflected not her appearance, but her heart. One night, as she turned to leave, she whispered, almost without thinking, I'll see you tomorrow. And though the mirror said nothing in reply, the glow of it lingered in her eyes as she stepped back into the night. The days unfolded like pages turning slowly in a cherished book. Camille's life remained simple mornings spent among quiet stacks of the library, afternoons with her hands brushing dust from old bindings, evenings where lamps glowed golden against the windows. Yet now, every moment seemed to lead her toward that small antique shop, toward the mirror that waited with steady light. The bond between them had grown like a hush of ivy, weaving quietly, invisibly, until one day Camille realized it surrounded her entirely. She no longer felt as though she was only visiting a strange object. She felt deeply that she was returning to someone, to him. One evening, when the air outside was still and the moon hung round and low, Camille lingered before the mirror longer than usual. The fog drifted softly within the glass, and his features emerged more clearly than ever: eyes, mouth, the gentle curve of his brow, as though he was drawing nearer with every breath she took. Who are you? She whispered again, but this time not with the curiosity of before. This time it was with tenderness, with a softness that carried her heart inside it. The mirror shimmered faintly, the fog curled, and then his voice, that dusky, quiet voice that always seemed to rise from memory itself, filled the space between them. I am someone who has waited longer than I can say, someone who has watched the world, searching for the one gaze that would know me, and it was yours. Camille closed her eyes for a moment, her hand resting against the frame. She felt no fear, no doubt, only a warmth that bloomed gently, like dawn light filling a still room. I don't understand how, she whispered. You don't need to, he replied. Not everything must be explained. Some things are only meant to be felt. She opened her eyes again, and in that moment the truth pressed gently into her heart. He was not her reflection. He was not an echo of her own form. He was a soul. Real, waiting, reaching across something larger than time itself. The shop, the city, even the night beyond the window seemed to fade. There was only the glow of the mirror, only his gaze resting upon her with unshaken gentleness. Camille's breath slowed, her shoulders loosening as though she had set down a burden she had carried without knowing it. She had spent so long being quiet, so long letting her days pass like turning pages in silence. Yet here in this gaze, she felt something different. She felt seen not for what the world thought of her, not for her tasks or her days, but for something quieter, deeper. And with that realization came peace. She pressed her palm against the glass, letting it hover there. The air between them shimmered faintly, almost as if his hand met hers from the other side. Not fully, not solid, but enough to make her heart settle in the most tender way. There were no grand declarations, no rushing words, only this the soft knowledge that whatever bound them was love, not the hurried kind, not the loud, burning kind, but a love that had waited, patient and still, like a lantern glowing in the dark until someone finally opened the door to see it. And in the stillness of that night, Camille let a small smile touch her lips, for she knew now. She was no longer looking into a mirror, she was looking into a heart. The night after her quiet realization, Camille lingered longer in the antique shop than she ever had before. The shopkeeper had locked the door early, leaving Camille alone among the shelves of forgotten things, as though granting her a sanctuary. She stood before the mirror, her shawl gathered softly around her shoulders, and the glass shimmered with its familiar glow. His gaze was there, steady as always. No matter how many evenings had passed, his eyes still held her as though nothing else in the world mattered. "Would you like to come home with me?" Camille whispered, her words feather light, barely more than breath. She knew he could not step through, not in any ordinary way, yet the thought of leaving the mirror behind each night felt heavier with each passing day. The fog within the glass curled softly, as if stirred by her question. His voice came, low and warm, like the hum of a string plucked in the stillness. "Where you are is where I belong." Her heart softened, not in a rush, but like water smoothing the edges of a stone. With careful hands, she lifted the mirror. From its place, the frame was heavier than it looked, but she carried it gently, cradling it close as if it were alive. And when she stepped into the quiet street, the glass glowed faintly, casting a silvery light along the cobblestones. A home. Camille placed the mirror by her window. The moonlight poured across its surface, and within it, his gaze shone softly, as though the night itself bent closer to listen. Her little room felt changed. The worn wooden table, the books stacked along the wall, the chair she had always kept by the window, everything seemed gentler, as if touched by the presence within. The mirror, each evening afterward, Camille sat near the glass, her shawl wrapped close, speaking to him in the hush of lamplight. She told him of her days of children laughing in the library's corner, of the quiet joy she felt when someone discovered a book long forgotten. She spoke of the way the afternoon sun left patterns of gold on her floor, and of how the scent of lilacs drifted in through her window with the breeze, and he, in turn, offered small murmurs. Not long sentences, never loud, but enough. Enough to let her know he was listening, enough to make the room glow with closeness. "Your days are soft," he said once. "They are softer now," she whispered back. The nights grew peaceful. She no longer felt the ache of loneliness that once stretched wide in her chest. Instead, there was a steadiness, a gentle companionship that filled the spaces between silence. Sometimes, as her eyes grew heavy, Camille would see it, his hand moving faintly within the glass, as though brushing air that almost reached her. She would lift her own, pressing it lightly against the mirror's surface, and though there was still a divide, it felt enough, enough to let her drift towards sleep with warmth humming quietly inside her. Her dreams changed too. She dreamed not of emptiness, but of shared stillness, of walking beneath trees with leaves glowing like silver, of sitting at a table where the glow of the mirror rested beside a cup of tea, of a gaze that followed her into every dream like moonlight into water. And when she woke, the mirror would still be there, patient, calm, reflecting only the love that had begun to weave so gently into her life. Camille no longer hurried through her days. She moved more slowly, with the ease of someone who carried a secret lantern within her. For she knew every evening that warmth waited for her by the window, and it was enough to bring peace to every hour. The nights drifted on, slow and unhurried. The mirror sat by Camille's window, bathed each evening in the glow of the moon, and every night, as she settled into her chair, as she rested her shawl against her shoulders, his gaze met hers with the same calm tenderness. It never wavered, never rushed. It was simply there, like the rhythm of her breath, like the tide brushing the shore, steady, patient, eternal. Sometimes, as she leaned back, her eyes half closed, she would whisper, "Stay with me." And though he did not step from the glass, though the distance between them never fully disappeared, the glow within the mirror would deepen, shimmering softly across her walls. It was his answer, quiet but certain. He was there, always. Camille began to sleep with the mirror close, its light touching her room like a gentle candle. She would drift into slumber with his presence resting softly against her heart, and in her dreams, the divide dissolved. In those dreams, she walked beside him through fields that glowed faintly as though dusted with starlight. They moved without hurry, their steps slow, their hands brushing together as though they had always belonged that way. Sometimes they sat beneath trees whose leaves shimmered like silver threads, and the world was utterly still. There were no words in those dreams, only the nearness, only the comfort of silence shared with someone who needed no explanation. When Camille woke, the dreams stayed with her, lingering like the warmth of sunlight upon skin, and though the mirror remained only glass and glow, she knew she had been touched by something real, something beyond time. One night, as she lay in bed, the moonlight spilling across her blanket, she whispered toward the mirror without rising, "Thank you." Her voice was drowsy, almost gone to sleep, but the words carried the fullness of her heart. Gratitude for the quiet, for the stillness, for the way she no longer felt alone in the wide spaces of the world. The mirror glowed faintly in reply, soft as breath, calm as dusk. His gaze lingered steady in the glass, and though her eyelids grew heavy, Camille felt his presence resting gently in the room, a lullaby without sound, a closeness without weight. And as she drifted into sleep, the night itself seemed to sigh. With her, the curtains stirred softly in the breeze. The walls glowed faintly with moonlight, and the mirror. The mirror reflected only love. Her breathing slowed, her dreams opened, and the world grew endlessly still. And so the story comes to rest. A story not of grand moments, but of quietness, of tenderness, of the kind of love that asks for nothing but presence. As you close your eyes now, you may let Camille's peace become your own. Let the warmth of gentle companionship fill your heart, the way a lantern fills a room with glow. There is nothing you need to do, no hurry, no effort, only rest, only the soft, slow drift into dreams. Sleep well, dear listener. May your night reflect only love.